Awesome. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I can see everyone joining in. Thank you for joining us today. While everyone is still joining in, we'll begin by a quick recap video for the year. Let's roll the clip.
When 400 plus supply chain professionals from across Canada gathered in Calgary, something extraordinary happened. It all began with the Procurement Professional Open.
In a world where supply chain professionals are required to be so planful and precise, what a wonderful way to kick off the conference by going beyond the boardroom, going beyond the screen, by having fun at the Supply Chain Canada's Procurement Professionals Golf Tournament.
As the sun set over the Rockies, our kickoff reception brought together the voices that move Canada's economy.
This year's theme, Chain Reaction, Powering Supply Chain Innovation, speaks to the accelerating pace of change and the critical role we play in shaping what comes next. Innovation, my friends, doesn't happen in isolation. It's sparked by connection, it's sparked by collaboration, and that's exactly what this conference is all about, and that's what our association is all about.
On the first day of the conference, Premier Danielle Smith delivered powerful insights on supply chain professionals' critical role in Alberta's economic future. Her message was clear: you aren't just managing logistics, you're building Canada's competitive advantage. At the Legacy Awards ceremony, we celebrated the giants whose shoulders we stand on. These industry pioneers didn't just build careers, they built the foundation for Canada's supply chain excellence. The 2025 Supply Chain Canada National Conference reminded us that when we come together, we're not just stronger, we're unstoppable. Together, we're building the future of Canadian supply chain excellence. Join us as we continue advancing Canada's supply chain profession.
Hey, thank you so much for that look back. An incredible gathering that was in Calgary. That message about connection, collaboration, and how innovation doesn't happen in isolation. It's sparked by working together. It's exactly what today's webinar and session is all about. For those who have just tuned in, welcome to today's webinar on the warehouse blind spot, 5 fixes to stop losing cash and time. Thank you for joining us today. We are just getting started. Whether you're dealing with labor challenges, peak season volatility, or rising cost, the warehouse is often where these pressures hit the hardest, and where small fixes can deliver immediate impact. Before we jump in to today's session, I would like to quickly go over some housekeeping notes. Today's session is being recorded. The recording and the slide deck will be shared via email after this event with all of the attendees here today. So no need to take notes unless you would want to. Alberta members will automatically receive 2 CPD credits on their SCC portal. Members from other provinces, please add them manually to your Supply Chain Canada account. Everyone is in listen-only mode to avoid background noise. However, we have a dedicated Q&A session at the end. So feel free to send in your questions at any time of the session as you want, using the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Now, moving on to why we are here today. Here is the reality. Peak volatility, labor gaps, and rising carrying cost means every dock-to-dock stock minute, every pick path, and every slot matters. Small operational time leaks are quietly killing performance and margins. Today's session is all about identifying those blind spots and the hidden issues that busy warehouses overlook, and giving you practical, durable fixes you can implement immediately, regardless of your warehouse management system or tech stack. To guide us through with these fixes, we have an exceptional practitioner joining us today. Please welcome Brent Willett, founder of Engaged SCM. Brent is a supply chain transformation specialist with over 15 years of experience helping organizations improve warehouse performance, modernize operations, and prepare for automation. He leads Engaged SCM, a boutique supply chain consulting firm focused on bridging operations and technology for mid-market organizations. His experience spans manufacturing, energy, forestry, retail, distribution, and the public sector, from municipal operations to complex industrial environments. Brent previously led supply chain advisory teams at Deloitte and EY, where he specialized in digital enablement, warehouse redesign, and operational efficiency. His track record includes a 33% warehouse cost reduction from an agribusiness, $3.4 million in labor savings in just 16 weeks, and a standardization across 37 warehouses. His approach blends operational know-how with a deep understanding of systems and technology, enabling organizations to unlock value quickly with or without automation. Today, Brent will walk us through the 5 warehouse blind spots that quietly erode performance and what leaders can do to improve them immediately. So without taking any more time, Brent, the stage is yours.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And thanks everyone for joining me, for those in Alberta over your lunch and across Canada as well. Um, what I wanted to do is kind of just set the tone and understand where everybody's, view is on warehousing and understanding the warehouse within your own operations. Because I know not everybody on this call either works in a warehouse or is tied to production or operations. There's likely lots of you around procurement and the contract side. So part of today and part of Alan's message in his opening intro was, we're all integrated. And so I also want to show, how everybody across our function of supply chain is either impacting the warehouse or is impacted from the warehouse. So with that, we're going to just kick off to the first slide here, and actually it's a poll, and I really like to just get to know and get to understand where everybody views your operations within the warehouse and how you view and how closely you are to that operation. So if you can just select here around how confident you are in the performance. So you're either tied to the warehouse, you're adamantly working in the warehouse, so you know how it's working and it's very confident. You know that things are running smoothly, or you're not quite sure how things are going, or it's potentially in another building and you just quite honestly don't know. You're buying the product, you expect it to receive, and you expect it to go out on time based on your contracts. So, first question here, just help me understand where we all are in terms of the warehouse and your operations. Somewhat confident. Okay, great. So we got about a quarter of us that really aren't tied close to the warehouse. And then, nobody that's very confident in running their warehouse or knowing how well the warehouse runs. So I'm happy that we're going to be able to go through some of those five key blind spots just on today. And I think it's imperative to understand that we're going to talk about some foundational issues, and we're going to talk about some things that any warehouse can do. So you don't need to be the large Amazons. You can be a SME warehouse or a warehouse that only has 5 to 10 people operating it. Because at the end of the day, it's foundational to fix these problems before you even get into technology. So I'm going to close this and we'll jump into our first slide here. So again, 26% of you don't know really what's going on in the warehouse. And quite honestly, it doesn't matter because everything that's operating from the warehouse and the performance in the warehouse either impacts procurement, maintenance, planning across the entire value chain. And because delays in the warehouse are then, you know, exasperated by having rush orders, fire drills. Quite honestly, anytime that the warehouse itself isn't running optimally, the entire organization is going to end up paying for it because those on procurement, you're going to have to start expediting, you're going to have increased travel, you might even have to order from a different supplier. Those in maintenance, you have assets down, which is costing the organization money. So it's all actually linked. Procurement not only is impacted by the warehouse, but when we start looking at how we buy, right, we always want volume buy discounts. We always want the greatest value that we can get. Well, those impact the warehouse if we don't know that 26 pallets out of a C can are coming instead of the four because we got an extra 10 points savings. But those 10 points can quickly erode just through inefficient warehouse operations on potentially overtime, right? So when we look at the total cost of savings, it's kind of or we have to start looking at, okay, where is the initial savings, but what's the impact along the way? And if we're not communicating that impact along the way, the warehouse is going to get tied up, it's going to have overtime, and those initial cost savings that we have are actually going to end up being eroded completely. Same with vendor contracts. I can't tell you how many organizations we go into and the vendors and the sales team have negotiated SLAs on their side of the contract and have never really communicated it to the warehouse until it's almost too late. Or we have never worked with the warehouse to say, yeah, that 24-hour turnaround time actually makes sense and it is doable. And maybe it is doable, but maybe the warehouse needs to add 2 or 3 more FTEs to make sure it's done. And that way you can start working those costs back into the negotiation strategy. So all in all, it's the warehouse is sometimes viewed as just a box with all the inventory either down below because we're sitting up in the office, kind of like The Office, if anyone's watched that show, or it's just in a completely separate building. And because you don't have line of sight to it, it's like they operate on their own and they're just going to make it work. But really, we have to come together and have that communication and understanding of how what we do on sourcing, purchasing, contract management impacts the overall warehouse. So, quite frankly, anything that happens in the warehouse, everybody's going to feel the same pain. It's just going to look from different angles, and those costs are going to escalate just across the overall organization. So, to those costs, some of the larger organizations and some of the larger consulting groups have put together some stats around fixing purely the foundational elements. Foundation being labor, safety, pick path flow, your layout design. So nothing to do with technology, but all the components that are going to get supported by technology, right? Because always remember that, at least on the warehouse side, technology is going to expose your issues. It's not going to solve your issues. It's actually going to show you where all your problems are because now you've just layered on something that's supposed to automate a really bad process. And you end up just actually increasing your costs overall. You increase complexity and you increase confusion. So by fixing things such as how is the warehouse laid out, how are our pick paths designed? How are our racking? How's that even configured? You can simply you get between a 20 and 30% labor productivity savings right there. And the implementation of technology can be a win once, we'll go through the five core elements today, but the technology can be a win after you fix those. And quite honestly, technology is normally a longer ROI, right? You got requirements gathering, you got the RFX process, you got the contract to manage, you got the implementation to manage, and then you're typically on a productivity curve where you get the ROI 2 quarters later. So if you're thinking about, where can we actually get savings in our warehouse for 2026, it's rarely going to be an implementation technology if we haven't already started. It's going to be, quite frankly, some of these basic five that we're going to go through today. And at the top, in the introduction, Jigger mentioned 33% savings, and that was over the course of 4 months. So we went into an organization, it was about 125,000 square feet, and they had 3 shifts. Each shift cost about $1.2 million a year. So 3 8-hour shifts in the day, just a constant rotation. What ended up happening was we didn't actually implement any technology. We changed the layout on the floor to accommodate the types of material they had in the flow. We changed the material handling equipment, and we reconfigured their SAP scanners. So what was a minor cost, their ROI on, they saved 1.2 million. We took out an entire shift for less than $50,000. So just by looking at these standard kind of what are we doing and why are we doing it questions, it's actually fairly quick to get an ROI on these basic foundations. Same with inventory cost and throughput improvement. The whole thing around a warehouse is, okay, we store inventory, but what's the velocity? How quickly can we get the product in the door and on the shelf? And then how quickly can we get it on the shelf and back out the door? So let's start covering some of these basic fives. So you can take that back, you can think through. And at the end of this, we're actually going to have a takeaway for you to start implementing it within your own organizations. So the five that I keep mentioning, here are the 5 blind spots. People and execution discipline. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day how much we change, or again, what technology we change or the processes we change. If we don't have the right people and we don't have the discipline to execute what we have, we're not going to get the ROI or the savings. Workflow complexity. This is keeping it simple. That nomenclature that everybody knows, it's taking the unnecessary steps, the unnecessary paths out of the equation, because what typically will happen is we just keep compounding everything year over year. It's, well, we do it this way because we've always done it this way because. As soon as you start laying things out on a piece of paper and mapping your process, the redundancy and the duplication starts showing its face very quickly. Physical layout and movement. So is the warehouse actually set up for the material flow that we need? Or is it, okay, we had racking, we know we need shelves, we built this thing 10 years ago, but we've never really stepped back, just because we're always so busy and we don't have time. So just looking at the layout, the equipment that we have, kind of in that first example we just talked about around that $1.2 million of savings, that was all layout. That was all racking type. That was all racking configuration. It didn't take anything more than that. Communication flow is kind of next big one to that people and execution discipline, right? So prioritization, like what do we do when we have 16 things to get done? Does everybody know? Is everybody aligned? Do the technicians know when the products are actually going to show up? Do we know from procurement when a truckload's actually going to show up? Some organizations have what's called ASN, so Advanced Shipping Notice, which is an EDI, but a lot of organizations in the warehouse, product just shows up and we have no idea. We have no time to actually build our warehousing or our resourcing plan around that. So having the communication internally can definitely decrease costs and again, decrease overtime. And then the big one too, inventory visibility. So the largest part of labor in an organization is the picking process. Typically it's 70%, around 70% of all labor costs are on the pick path. So do we know where the inventory is? Is it consistently in the right place? Is it consistently in the amounts that our tech says, right, within our WMS or ERP system? So the inventory visibility is key and crucial to make sure that the flow is supported. So let's dive into each one of these. We'll talk through a couple examples. We'll talk through, the main points that I'd like you to take away from this and that you can actually take back and start thinking through, okay, does this fit within our warehouse? So people and execution discipline. So when we go into organizations, we obviously have our standard checklists, but we also, where a lot of the findings come from is walking the floor. So we'll take an hour, we'll take a couple hours, and we'll walk the floor and we'll talk with people. And a lot of the time it comes up that, hey, when we get busy, everything is important and everything's a priority. And everybody knows if everything's a priority, then nothing's a priority, right? Yeah, you can't do it all. And so within the organization, within the warehouse, we need to have very clear triggers around when A happens, we need to execute B. And I think a great example is my time. So I worked for an organization called Motion Industries, and I was the director of supply chain and for Canada. And what we ended up, walking into that organization, they had lots of small parcels and lots of small packages. The first day I recall showing up and we had pallets and pallets of parcels that were delivered but have not been received. And so there would be a date around when it came into the building and then a date of actually receipt into the system. And, we had a turnaround time of about 24 hours. From the time it got into the building, it should be on the shelf within 24 hours, which was even long by today's standards. But there was a priority that we just needed to make sure that the product got out to the customer. Well, the challenge is if you're not receiving anything, at some point there's a tipping scale where it goes to the other side and you just don't have all the inventory on a shelf. So you ship, 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 and then within 24, 48 hours, everybody has to go and receive, receive, receive. And it was this very kind of the velocity was not flowing in terms of standard approach and standard workflow. So it's okay, let's put in triggers. As soon as we have X amount of product that comes into the building, we have to make sure that we have an additional FTE pulled from whether it's the picking or whether it's the packing stage to come and help receive it so we can get it on the shelf and then we can get it back out. So we need to make sure that those priorities are clearly laid out because a lot of organizations are firefighting. And again, that could be procurement, that could be in the warehouse, it's across business. But having those clear, okay, when A happens, let's execute on B is typically a very quick win. And the teams on the floor are very thankful that they have the direction, right? Around, okay, I know what the priorities are, and there's an execution discipline around that. Another big one is around we've always done it that way. Now, sometimes it makes sense because you've figured out how the environment actually works. But having it done that, it's always been this way, therefore we cannot change is a killer in any organization, any function, and warehousing is no slouch on that one as well. So around that, it's understanding what the priority is, it's understanding what the workflow should be, and really having a capability assessment and making sure the training is there. I can't tell you how many organizations will hire staff in the warehouse and they'll go, it's actually pretty simple. Just go talk to John. John will help you out. There's no formal training, and without formal training, they don't understand the impacts. People don't understand the KPIs. We need to make sure that there is real training and that the training is based on methods, training is based on workflow, and the training is based on the reality of your environment. And then kind of going with that is the workarounds replace process. So if you don't have anything written down, it's kind of just get the job done. And then a lot of times we have to be flexible, but people also like some structure, right? And on the warehouse, when you're going to get called in because these things weren't shipped on time, okay, well, let's start looking, let's go backwards and understand why those things weren't shipped. If you don't have a clear process and you don't have clear training and people don't understand their own capabilities and what they need, it's very difficult to start holding people accountable. So it's kind of like you got to start with a standard. You got to start with a structure, whether that's the training, whether that's the clear priority triggers, whether it's the toolbox meeting every day having, okay, what are our three priorities? Standard and structure is missing and lacking in a lot of organizations. And trust me, warehouses, when it's all about material flow and velocity, If you can standardize 80% of your processes and deal with the exceptions, you're going to be in a lot better shape and it's going to flow a lot smoother. So kind of building on that is workflow complexity. There are so many steps in a lot of organizations that are driven by technology. So if I'm an accountant and well, if I'm a risk advisor and I look at the flow of an organization, it's okay. How do I minimize risk? How do we just make sure everything's perfect and we have three checks within this process and we're doing all the right things to make sure the customer has the appropriate product, which is right, but those checks need to be done at the start and we need to remove all the duplicate efforts, right? So if you have a scanning gun and you have 6 steps on the scanning gun, as opposed to even three, those 3 steps save 10 seconds a pick. You look at how many picks you have over an hour, over a day, over a year. It's simplifying the technology. It's simplifying how do we flow. So we have choke points in a lot of organizations, right? And again, one could be the return. So we receive the return, it's sitting on a table, and it kind of consolidates for the next week, and then before you know it, you got this pile of returns. Well, the issue is because we got to talk to procurement, we got to talk to contracting, we got to talk to the supplier, we got all these different people. What is the actual flow of returns documented? If it's not a process, then people are gonna avoid doing the work. There's not going to be a standard to complete it, and the workload is going to be absolutely bananas, quite frankly, because nobody's going to be able to have a clear path as to what we're supposed to be executing, when do we execute it, how do we execute it. It's normally just, we'll phone the procurement team, tell them that the vendor didn't get the right stuff, and we'll figure it out. And that product sits for a week. That's cash tied up for you. That's cash tied up for your vendor, quite frankly. And it's unnecessary material that's likely going to get damaged or forgotten over the course of the day or the week or the month for that side. So simplify the processes. A starting point would be simply use Visio or get the other big one's Lucid. I think it's about $50 for the year. Start mapping those processes, and you're going to start understanding just how much duplicate effort you have. The other side is people start understanding, okay, what I do over here on the pick side impacts the packing team over here. Similarly, bring procurement into the organization and into those discussions, because once you start having multi-cross or cross-functional conversations around what's happening in the warehouse, it starts becoming kind of the light goes on around, okay, what I do here is impacting how they receive, it's impacting how quickly they can receive. So structure the standard of work, map out the standard of work, and then start simplifying best you can. Leverage technology after you've standard the workflow. I would not recommend going, okay, we have this new ERP, we have this new WMS, just bolt it on and it'll go quicker. Yeah, you might get a little bit of an uptake on your, picking, because it goes from 60 lines per hour to 200 lines per hour. But if your inventory is wrong, the induction of the inventory into the machine is wrong, like the whole process is broken. So always recommend that you map out the process, and it could just be your standard pick, pack, receive, ship, inspection, returns, and quality assignment. So get people the training, base the training off the maps, create the standards from the maps, and then you actually have a structured approach as to how you can manage that warehouse. Because the other side as a leader is, okay, well, I told you to do this, but if you don't have a standard and you don't have a sign off, it's very hard to hold people accountable, right? So it kind of also gives you your performance management lens, that you're going to be basing a lot of this on. The next one, so we got people, we got workflow complexity, and the next one we have here is physical layout and movement. So friction on this it's abundant, and quite honestly, physical layout and designing warehouses is one of my favorite things. A lot of organizations group inventory within their warehouse by type instead of velocity. So velocity being how quickly does the inventory come in and out, right? So we want our fast movers to be in what's called the golden zone. Golden zone being from about knee height to chest height, close to the receiving doors and close to the shipping doors. Because again, with picking being 70% of the labor costs within a warehouse, we want to reduce the time of picking. Therefore, the golden zone should be close to where we're going to be picking from. Now, again, if you have a very large warehouse and a complicated warehouse, you don't want all your fast movers into one area because then you get congestion issues. But ultimately, when we start looking at a warehouse, we want to look at what is the inventory, what are our high movers, what's our A items, and how do we allocate that into the golden pick zone? And are they on the right material handling equipment, right? So is it on a mezzanine? Does it need to be in pallet racking? Can it be within, storage bins just on shelf racking? We need to start matching all those because most organizations will just put up pallet racking and go, this is what we got. They won't configure the dimensions of it. They won't configure even how do we slot it? How do we sort it? There's a space and we're just going to fill the space. So if you can save on your pick path, you're going to increase productivity substantially. And this is where we got that, 1/3 savings within 4 months in an organization by strictly looking at the velocity, the inventory location, and the handling equipment. And similar to that, pick paths are not intentionally designed. So if you have a scanner, I would highly recommend, or at least guess, that 80% of the ERPs or WMS that you have can actually optimize the pick path for you based on locations within your warehouse. So if you haven't done that, that would be kind of a first step is confirm and then configure. So I think a lot of organizations actually have technology that's just not used very well. I'm dealing with that right now with an organization where they implemented SAP. They've had it for about 3 years, and they were looking at implementing a whole new advanced transportation management system and EWM. After our quick review, it was quick. We realized that no, what you have is more than the standard S/4HANA is more than enough for what your needs are. It's just a configuration issue. And so it's asking the right questions at configuration. And a lot of organizations just quite honestly don't ask the right questions. And so right now we're helping a couple through that requirements gathering stage. But if you can configure what you already have to optimize that pick path, you're going to reduce labor costs if that's what your ultimate goal is, but you're going to significantly increase labor productivity. And another big one that we always see is kind of the pick lanes. And so, you're putting things away, and then there's a priority that somebody just yelled from the top that you need to go deal with. And you got inventory that are stuck within the pick lanes or within the pallet lanes. And now you need somebody else to go move it. You kind of got stuck in the middle of your flow, so it's not put away. Likelihood of inventory going missing from that is relatively high. So it's not just from the first one we talked about, it's not just identifying the priority triggers, but it's okay, how do we move into those priority paths? And so a lot of that is just saying, okay, you have to operate on a 5S methodology. So that one of those being keeping areas clean. So if you start a project or you start picking or you start staging or you start putting away, finish that task before you move into the next one. You also start getting a lot of safety issues around that one. So figure out the golden zone, make sure your material handling equipment is appropriate for the inventory that you're moving, and then have dedicated lines on the floors because, you know, I'm going to use the example, even like we have a cat at home, right? Cats always seem to just find the box in the house. But same thing, if you put lines on the floor as designated areas, people tend to stay within those defined areas. Just, bright yellow paint marks, don't use tape because tape will get ripped up from the forklifts. But if you can lay out the markings, you lay out your actual zones within the warehouse, you have the appropriate equipment for the material you're moving, you're going to save quite a bit of money on labor. And so this is, I'd say, my number one recommendation for any size of warehouse. The one on the top image there, real quick, it's a 9,000 square foot warehouse. Like, it's nothing in terms of some of what a lot of you have. but we were still able to significantly improve throughput just by marking zones, marking shelving, and developing a new throughput pick path on it. So those are the first three. The second one is the inventory visibility. So once you have your material handling equipment and material holding equipment managed, then it's okay, how do we optimize inventory on those shelves? So same thing as the picking, right? The searching, the walking, it's supposed to be here, but where is it? It happens all too often. So we need to make sure that the bins are located. We need to make sure that everyone understands if we take it out, we don't put it back. You can have kind of an area for the warehouse team to put it back, somebody specific in the warehouse team to put it back. If we have inventory that comes inbound and we don't put it away, then the procurement team's going, okay, well, the vendor said it was delivered on Tuesday and it's Wednesday and we still can't ship it for the client. Why is that? Well, it's because now you have what's called dark inventory and it's in the warehouse, but nobody can actually access it. So it doesn't really do you any good anyway. So quickly having a turnaround is to rapid inbound and getting it on the shelf. Another big one is anything with expiry dates or warranties, right? Got to make sure that we have that in the system because there is constantly, well, I got another organization right now. They have expired products or products with expiry dates on it, gaskets and whatnot. And they're in to the tune of over $1 million annually of throwing out expired product because of not because they couldn't use it, but because they had duplicate inventory because the laydown yard and the techs on the welding center have, you know, 10 pieces of XYZ. The warehouse didn't know that they took it, so they adjusted their inventory. So now they have zero XYZ, which kicks off a trigger to procurement. Procurement now orders it again, and now you got duplicate inventory. So making sure that not only you know where the inventory is within the warehouse, but within the system is absolutely critical. Use your transfers appropriately. I think the big one that I always see as well, or that I've started to see a lot more often, is warehouses are they're trying to save money, right? And so they start reducing the labor within the warehouse. So if you are tied to an operations plant or you're tied to, yeah, manufacturing plant and you have technicians, a lot of organizations are starting to open up the warehouse where the technicians can say, okay, I actually know the part that I need. I know where it is. I'll just go scan it. I'll scan my badge and they'll tie directly to it, which is great if you have a standard and a compliance where people are actually going to scan their badge. But there is a large communication gap right now because we're trying to save money in the warehouse, but we still need to get our technicians the inventory. So the technicians are now starting to pick their own inventory. There is a giant communication flow. There's an accountability issue. There's a role and responsibility challenge. And quite honestly, a lot of technicians, we all love them because they make sure that the plant's still running. Inventory control is not their concern, right? It's making sure that the plant's still running. So we have to start having a balance around how do we use technology to make sure maybe it's an RFID on certain parts that as soon as it leaves out the door, it can scan directly to the work order, directly to that employee that took it. So there are definitely ways that organizations are trying to save money, but it's actually costing them a lot more in the long run. So the recommendation here is always make sure that you can track the inventory, you have visibility throughout the entire organization, and everybody knows what's going on, right? And so when we talk about procurement impacting warehousing and warehousing impacting procurement, we sometimes have the daily talks for warehouses. Some organizations have the daily tool talk once a week, grab procurement. Have somebody from that team come in so they understand and they can share what the big orders are coming up. They can share what the priorities are. They can tell the feedback that they're hearing from the vendors. They might even be hearing it from the sales team as well. So it's actually cross communicating and getting that communication flow for everybody. That's kind of one of the big wins that we're starting to recommend and seeing really good gains because the culture starts shifting away from the the office folks and the warehouse folks. We've walked into a lot of those organizations too, where the warehouse just doesn't know what they're doing. And procurement does, they don't talk to us and they think they're better than everybody else. But you got to get those communication, you got to have those weekly meetings. It ends up saving a lot of time and everybody is heard. You save on overtime, you save on duplicate orders, you save face on customers a lot, quite honestly, too. And you start determining as a group what's urgent and what's important, right? So if you know that you got a shutdown coming on, we're going to start kitting all of these processes. Make sure we're having these conversations with the maintenance team, with the procurement team, and don't just work in isolation. So everybody knows, because a lot of the time too, on whether it's shutdown or just reliability and maintenance operations, if their work order sequencing changes. And warehouse is normally the one that just goes, well, nobody told us this. And 9 times out of 10, it's true. So increasing that communication flow is absolutely critical across the organization. So the five that we talked about, right? They're not driven by technology, but they are enabled. So if these five, whether it's the roles and responsibilities in the system on identifying who can do what, if it's the layout's not actually proper, if it's our bin locations and our inventory accuracy are terrible, or even the execution side where, yeah, we know we're supposed to do this in the gun, but it's just a lot quicker if we go this way. Technology is going to expose all those issues. So, I always say if we don't fix the process, you're just going to have really expensive technology that's going to do the bad process at the same time. Now, when these are all fixed, that's kind of when the fun stuff really starts. And I didn't want to spend too much time today, but I think it's important and I think it's imperative actually that we start talking about what's coming next. Like, what are we seeing in warehousing, right? Like, robots are sexy, robots are fun, and they can really do a lot for productivity, for labor improvement, for visibility, for flexibility and and being agile on the work floor. There's a couple kind of key guiding principles around here. Number one is robots need velocity, not uniformity. So it doesn't matter if you have a whole bunch of different types of products. If you need pick rates around 2, 3, 400 items an hour, robotics is actually a great side for that. There's an organization here in town actually that Supply Chain Canada, Alan and team put together a tour of. I'll give them a quick shout out. Is Valen, and they have some pretty interesting. They got some great automated storage and automated retrieval tools. One of the better ones I've seen in Edmonton actually, and they need that velocity for their organization, right? Like 600 lines per minute. It makes sense for that investment, and it's consistent and the velocity is there for their business model. As much as a consultant as I want to say, yeah, we're putting robots everywhere, it just doesn't make sense. The CPA in me says this cost doesn't justify what you're doing. Honestly, another body would probably support your increased throughput. Now, that's for velocity. You also might run into areas where you're not going to buy a new building, but you need more throughput. You need denser storage in a facility. Robotics actually would be a good role for that as well. So if you have high velocity and you're growing, or you need to increase the density of the footprint that you already have, then yeah, the ASRRS solutions are actually one to start considering. But as we mentioned, foundations matter a lot. So the first one on the left is an ASR. The company's called Exotech. The robots have a giant wall with all sorts of different inventory. It's kind of like Amazon, where the individual is sitting at the pick station and the robots come to them and they just consolidate everything into the box. It's quite a slick mentality. And all these pictures are from a conference that I had the pleasure of going to in Chicago. So happy to talk about robotics with everybody after, if you want to get a little bit deeper into what's going on in industry and what we're actually seeing. But from this conversation, it's foundations matter. The five we talked about are critical, specifically when we get into robotics like the one in the second image, where it's pulling the inventory out of a C can, putting it onto a conveyor that's going to go right to the receive station. So if you don't have a facility mapped out, your layout mapped out, and very clear priority along with workflows, robotics doesn't do a whole lot for you in these types of situations, right? Because you got to feed all that data into the robot as to what you're going to do and how it's going to perform and when it's going to change course. So the five that we just talked about are actually inputs into a lot of the robotics that you're going to see, whether again it's Amazon or Walmart or some of these big organizations. But I think the key here too is smaller organizations can do it when it's fit for purpose. So automation does amplify whatever warehouse state you're currently operating in. Um, there are, like I mentioned, there's Valen, there's Motion, there's Napa, there's a lot actually out in the Toronto area, Shoppers Drug Mart, Canadian Tire that have automated workflows and automated robotics. But again, it's if you're at that scale, yeah, the ROI is actually quite simple to justify. If you're at the small medium, again, I go back to the configuration of the technology that you already have. Like we don't need to go crazy or this next one where it's actually an organization's developing a humanoid. There's a lot we're seeing quite a few drone companies come out for managing inventory or doing inventory cycle counts within a warehouse. It makes sense for certain types of inventory, but again, if you got small parts with open boxes, it doesn't make too much sense. If you're doing inventory counts at a liquor depot, then yeah, it 100% makes sense because it's uniform, they're in boxes, everything's barcoded. But I just wanted to show that, yeah, that we're getting to the stage of actual humanoids. I'd say, if it ever actually comes true, we're probably 4 or 5 years away. It's the cool thing at the conference these days. But these ASRs, kind of this third picture and that first picture, do make sense when the application's there. And a lot of that is just around understanding your scale, understanding your operations, and understanding the five that we went through. So I'm going to leave you with this. So to get more out of the warehouse, right? Again, as Jigger said at the top, we're going to share these slides. Actually, I'm going to share a different version of these slides with more context and more support. So you can share these around as well. But I'd take one blind spot from today. I'd try to, identify what that blind spot is within our organization, the quick win. I'd take one flow. I'd map that out. I'd standardize it. And I'd actually sit everybody down that's on the warehouse floor and go, is this how we all see this? Or are there different discrepancies as to why, one, we'd want to work differently, or two, you've just been told in the past, right? Like we got to start standardizing the flow. Confirm your top 20 fast movers. So that will help you with the ABC segmentation and therefore your layout and your golden zone. And then add a cross-functional meeting one time per week. Like just try it for a month and see if it's see what benefits you're going to get out of it. And then run a 24-hour layout reset. So find whatever you can in terms of a snapshot. Give yourself 24 hours or somebody on your team to go, okay, how do we actually improve the flow? Just conceptually, just do it in PowerPoint or however you can do it, and then walk the floor, right? Have that piece of paper in hand, walk the floor, take a timer with you and see if you can improve the pick time, if you can improve the pack time, well, whichever productivity flow you selected. So we're going to send out this deck. I'd recommend at least try one of these within the coming weeks. And then we're also going to send out a checklist. Part of our assessments, it's we walk on the floor, we talk with the employees, we do interviews, we analyze the data. So we'll get pick rates, we'll get pack rates, we'll get shipments, we'll get transactional files, and then we'll also go through a standardized checklist for our warehouse improvement plans. And so we'll actually send out some of those checklist items in addition to what you see today, because I want to make sure that the warehouse gets value out of this. And if you are on the sourcing, if you are on the contract side, I wouldn't say, hey, warehouse team, do this, but start with, can we have a 10-minute cross-functional meeting once a week to just talk with your leadership and make sure everybody's on the same page for what's incoming and what are the critical priorities for this week. So I appreciate everybody's time. Hope you got some value out of that. I am absolutely passionate about this stuff. Like Jigger said, I've spent the majority of my career on it, but happy to answer any questions in the last 10 minutes we have.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brent. I'm sure every one of you here gained a lot of insights from your incredibly practical session. And I'm sure everyone also has a lot of questions about applying these fixes in their own operations. Just a quick reminder, folks, please continue sending your questions through the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We'll try to get through as much as possible. I would also like to mention we have already started receiving a few questions. The first one being from Janelle. She's asking, how do you manage kitted materials to maintain visibility and prevent reorder until the work order is closed and all materials are returned so that you don't end up with overage in inventory?
Yeah, so I mean, it depends on the WMS or ERP system you have. If you have available, like quantity of an inventory, available quantity, how those two different statuses are structured. But typically for a kit, you normally, and I guess it's a question, right? If you have a bill of materials and it's very easy and you just build this kit for a work order, a lot of that inventory should be shown as unavailable, right? So you'd build the kit, you'd scan it if you have barcoding, and it would be allocated to a work order, but it wouldn't be consumed yet. So once the technician completes it, then they would close the work order and the inventory would be consumed against it, but it would already show as unavailable within your ERP system. And because it's showing there but unavailable, then you can determine how you do your triggers on min max, right? So do we reorder it if it's already allocated, or do we reorder it? All right. So if we have 10 and we allocate four, we have six available, but we have 10 in the system. So what's your reorder point? Is it the 10? Is it the four? Or is it the six? So it's a conversation then around how likely is that kit going to get returned because they cancel the order? And that happens a lot. So I would actually make kind of a strategy around, okay, I wouldn't reorder it unless it's a very high volume item. I know we're gonna have throughput within the next month, right? Like we have 12 turns of it. It's not an issue to order it, I don't think. But if it's a unique environment or a unique kit and it's a C labeled item, then I'd have different strategies for different segregated item types. I hope that makes sense.
Yes. Thank you so much, Brent, for that valuable input. Alan, in your experience, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, no, I've fantastic presentation, Brent. And oftentimes when I go out and meet with different organizations, the challenge has always been how do I get started? And I love how you sort of provided some recommendations around, okay, here's all the areas in which waste is seen, and we often see that the cost are often hidden because it's so baked into the way that we run everything today. And it's often hard for an organization to really uncover these costs and say, here's the impact, right? And so this is what we need to do to change in order to address these costs, because if we don't address it, it just
Yeah.
continues to either be the same or it's going to get worse. I think, in your experience, Brent, what's the best way for folks here on the call to get started? Is it seeking the quick wins? Is it doing an inventory? Is it what's your advice to seek an understanding of these hidden costs? What's a quick win?
Yeah, great question, Ellen. And actually, we're kind of at the time of year where you just mentioned one where you can leverage what you're already going to have to do, which if you have a calendar fiscal year end, you're going to have to do inventory counts, right? So take a look. If you're more than, whatever your obsolescence rate is of 2% or 1.5%, that's a very easy ROI for a finance CFO to understand that, okay, we actually can reduce this even if they put in an obsolescence rate, one per month. So at the end of the year, you can have a big write down. But inventory, yeah, that would be the key. Second, I would look at what is the transaction level based on the FTEs that you have. So look at the pick rates, look at the pack rates, look at the ship rates, and benchmark it. So I don't think you want to go all in right out of the gate. You want to pick, you know, if you and I walked into a warehouse, I'm sure within 5 minutes we'd have a hypothesis as to where the cost savings would be coming from. And a lot of it, leverage what you're doing around. You have the transactional data, so review it. You're going to have inventory counts right away, so review it. You're going to be looking at, okay, what's your labor versus your output? So all your transactions in here, and you can actually do a labor study on that one. There's benchmarks out there we would look at. But I think the very first thing I would do is walk the floor, like talk with the people, because um, a lot of things pop up when somebody's picking a product and they just finished, ask them, well, what's the big issues? Like, what are your big challenges right now? So there's the structured approach around, yeah, use the data that you have, transactional inventory, um, ask questions, like walk on the floor, spend half an hour and just ask the right questions, because I can guarantee everybody on the floor will start having the same three or four themes. That's honestly that's where we start is getting to know the organization, getting to know the themes, the major challenges, and then we dive down into some of those data fields. But leverage what you can right out of the gate. But yeah.
Yeah. Hey, there's a couple of great questions from the audience as well. Jigar, can you maybe read out Trisha's question?
Yes. Yeah. So Trisha's asking, I'm currently running an automation analysis project for my warehouse, but
Mhm.
finding it challenging to source Canadian vendors.
Yep.
Would either of you, Brent, or Alan, feel comfortable providing company names she may consider? Brent, would you like to pitch in first?
So if I'm hearing that, it's you're looking for companies that provide automation that are based in Canada. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, and unfortunately, those who live in Calgary know the story that we lost a really good one recently. Hopefully they're going to survive, which was antibiotics. But I think, my question back, and maybe we have a quick one offline, is what technology are you looking for? Like, are you looking for an ASR type inventory system, or are you looking for conveyors, or are we just looking for, like an RPA solution that can take data from one field and automatically populate it into another field? It's that's a big question. So I would say I'm happy to have a quick conversation with Alan and yourself right after. But my first one would be what kind of automation are we looking at? And then my second question would be why.
Yeah.
So
Mm,
yeah.
and my guidance to it is before you go and explore technology as a tool, it's really important to sort of consistent to what Brent says. There is what do you need technology for? But then you go back and really what is a readiness as well
Yeah.
for that technology. And oftentimes, what we find is there's the excitement of, oh, we found this magic silver bullet that's going to fix everything, and typically it doesn't. And this is where Brent's presentation, it goes in and it goes deep around. Okay, let's understand this stuff, because there's some really important bolts and nuts in which you got to ask yourself these serious questions, because if anything, when you go the technology route, it's going to be more expensive. And then all it does is it exposes much of the issues that you have inherent in your current processes, layouts, people, and whatnot, right?
Yeah, and I know we're running out of time, but to that point, like I have implemented the ASRs, I have implemented automated guided vehicles. Um, the data required to support that as well is the data readiness is huge, right? And so I think a lot of organizations, and
Right.
that, I'm sure you've done all the due diligence, so I'm happy to have the conversation afterwards. But it's like, are we ready for that next step? And if we are, great. Let's have that conversation. Otherwise, let's talk about those foundation and those data elements that
Yeah.
we need to clean up. So,
There's two quick questions from the audience, and what we'll do is we'll take it offline. I'll have Brent respond to it, and then we'll share all of the responses with everyone. But before everyone goes, again, I think it's really important to assess what is the current state and what is the opportunity, and understand the problem that you want to solve first. And working with Brent, we're gonna get that checklist out to all of you to look at, and feel free to use the tool, the checklist, to walk through and check, right, to assess what the situation is. And if you need our help, where we can walk through this with you, and your warehouse, let us know, right, and we can support you as well. But really use that as a starting point, and then any additional questions or whatever, feel free to reach out to Brent directly, or myself, and we're happy to support you in this as well. Thank you so much for attending today, everyone. Great questions, and thanks for the engagement. Thank you, Brent, for sharing all this. I thought the presentation was very helpful and practical.
Thank you, Brent and
you
Arun.
guys.
And just a reminder, we'll be sending away the slide deck and the recording for this session. So please feel free to make the best use of it. Thank you so much for joining us for today's session. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.